The morning I found the email, I was just trying to print a boarding pass. My son had asked me to use his laptop while mine was at the repair shop, and I only needed 5 minutes. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't suspicious. I was 68 years old, and I trusted my child the way mothers do, blindly, completely, and, as it turned out, foolishly. The email was already open on the screen. I don't think he expected me to actually sit down at the desk. He probably thought I'd just grab the laptop and go to the kitchen table. But I sat down, and there it was, right in front of me, a message he'd sent to his wife 2 days earlier with the subject line, the timeline. I read it once and didn't understand. Then I read it again. If we can get Mom into Meadowbrook by September, we can list the Birchwood house before the market cools. House says we'd clear at least $400,000 after the mortgage. That's enough to wipe out the visa, the HELOC, and still have something left over. She won't fight it if we frame it right, say the doctor recommended it, say we're worried about her being alone. You know how she is. She'll feel guilty for being a burden and go along with it. I sat there with my hands in my lap for a long time. Meadowbrook, I knew that name. It was a memory care facility on Route 9, the kind of place with cheerful watercolor prints in the hallways and a locked door at the end of every wing. The kind of place where people went and didn't come home. But before I go any further, if you're watching this, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Our stories have reached people all over the world, and I love knowing who's listening. My name is Nora, and I am 71 years old now as I tell this story. 3 years ago, I was a retired school administrator living alone in the house I'd owned for 22 years. In a small city in upstate New York, my husband, Gerald, had passed away from a heart attack 7 years before that, and since then I'd done everything on my own, kept the house, managed my finances, drove myself to every appointment, maintained a garden, volunteered twice a week at the public library. I was not a woman who needed to be managed. But my son had decided otherwise. He had always been the kind of man who kept a spreadsheet for everything. Even as a teenager, he'd tracked his allowance down to the penny, color-coded and sorted by category. I used to find it charming. I used to brag about it to my friends. My son is so organized. What I didn't understand until I sat at his desk reading that email was that some people learn to organize the world around themselves, and eventually that includes the people in it. I should tell you about the money first, because that's the part that makes the email make sense. When my son was 24, he'd just gotten his MBA and he had a job offer in Chicago. But he and his girlfriend, the woman who is now his wife, wanted to stay close to home. He told me there was an opportunity to buy into a small financial planning firm, that if he could get in as a junior partner, he'd have a real future there. The buy-in was $120,000. I gave it to him. I had the money from Gerald's life insurance and from years of careful saving, and I gave it without hesitation because that's what mothers do, or at least that's what I believed then. 3 years after that, they wanted to buy a house. The market was moving fast, they said, and they'd found something perfect in Birchwood Heights, a neighborhood on the north side of the city with good schools and mature trees and the HOA that kept the lawns tidy. They needed help with the down payment. I gave them $85,000. The year after that, the firm my son had bought into started struggling. A bad investment, a client lawsuit, a restructuring that pushed him out of his partner position entirely. He landed at another firm, but at a lower salary, and they'd stretched themselves thin on the Birchwood house. They needed a bridge loan just until things stabilized. I lent them $40,000, though neither of us ever used the word lent out loud. Then came the credit card consolidation, which I helped with. Then a new roof on the Birchwood house, which I paid for because the insurance claim was denied. Then preschool for my granddaughter. A private Montessori that cost $18,000 a year because my son said the public options weren't good enough. I paid for 2 years of that, plus after-school care on top. I kept a small notebook in my dresser drawer where I wrote down every amount, every date. Not because I expected to be paid back. I wrote them down the way you write down a recipe you made up, to remember, to understand the shape of the thing. The total, when I added it up the night I found the email, was $340,000, not $5 million like some people give. Not a mansion and a beauty clinic and 3 wedding receptions, but $340,000 is real money. It was the last of Gerald's life insurance. It was the extra shifts I'd worked as a substitute when I first retired, just to stay useful. It was the vacation I'd never taken, the new car I'd kept putting off, the knee surgery my orthopedist had been recommending for 2 years that I'd been delaying because I didn't want to touch my savings. And now my son wanted to park me in a memory care facility so he could sell my house. I want to be clear about something. I do not have memory problems. I have never had memory problems. I still do the Sunday crossword in pen. I balance my checkbook by hand. My doctor, who I see every 6 months for a routine physical, has never once expressed concern about my cognitive health. Not once. The plan my son had outlined in that email was built on one thing: his certainty that I would go along with it, that I'd feel guilty, that I'd believe him over my own understanding of my own mind. He knew me well enough to know that I had spent my entire life trying not to be a burden on the people I loved, and he had decided to use that against me. I closed the laptop. I went back to my own house. I didn't say a word. That was a Thursday. By Monday morning, I had an appointment with an estate attorney. Her name was Sandra Coe, and she came recommended by a woman from my library volunteer group whose family had gone through something similar a few years back. Sandra had a small office on the 2nd floor of a building downtown above a dry cleaner, and she wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not waste my time with pleasantries. I told her everything. I showed her the notebook. I told her about the email. "The first thing we're going to do," she said, "is make sure your assets are protected and your wishes are clearly documented in a way that's very difficult to challenge." We spent 2 hours going through everything. My will, which had been written 10 years earlier and left the majority of my estate to my son, was completely rewritten. My house was placed into a irrevocable living trust with me as the sole trustee. My financial power of attorney, which had listed my son as my agent, was revoked and reassigned to a cousin I trusted, a retired nurse named Wanda who lived in Vermont and had always been sensible. My healthcare proxy was updated to match. "Is there anything in his name that gives him legal standing over your affairs right now?" Sandra asked. "No," I said, and that was true. I had always kept my finances separate. I had always believed that was the right thing to do, though I'd never had a reason to feel grateful for it until that moment. "Good," she said. "Then we're working with a clean slate." I paid her bill in cash and took the folder of documents home and put it in the fireproof box where I kept my important papers. I am not someone who acts rashly. I spent the next 3 weeks going about my life as normally as I could. I went to my volunteer shifts. I had my son and his wife over for dinner on a Sunday, and I watched him across the table and felt something inside me go very still and very cold. He talked about work, about my granddaughter's dance recital, about a trip they were planning to Scottsdale. He poured himself a second glass of wine and refilled my water glass without being asked, a small courtesy that once would have made me feel loved. I started making calls. The first was to a real estate attorney, a different one, who helped me understand the sale value of my house in the current market and explained what my options were if I wanted to sell it myself, privately, without my son being involved. The number she quoted made me sit down. The second call was to a travel agent, a real one, an actual agency in a strip mall, because I still prefer doing things face to face. And I told the woman behind the desk that I was interested in the retirement visa program and asked her what she knew about living abroad. She knew quite a bit. The third call was to my cousin Wanda, who I asked to come visit for a long weekend. She arrived on a Friday evening with a bottle of Vermont cider and a very calm, practical disposition, and I told her everything. She sat and listened, and when I was done, she said, "What do you need from me?" That's the kind of person Wanda is. Over that weekend we made a plan. It was not a small plan. I want you to understand the size of what I was doing. I was preparing to leave a city I had lived in for 34 years, sell a house I had raised my son in, and move to a country I had visited exactly once, on a group tour 15 years ago. I was doing this at 68 years old, with a bad knee, because my son had decided to put me in a memory care facility to pay off his credit cards. When I say it like that, it sounds clear. At the time, it felt like standing on the edge of something with no bottom, but I kept moving forward. My son called on a Tuesday evening, about a month after I'd found the email. His voice was careful in a way I'd never quite noticed before. Calibrated, just warm enough. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "I'm worried about you being in that house alone. It's a lot of upkeep for one person." "I manage fine," I said. "I know you do, but I was talking to Dr. Fielding's office." Dr. Fielding was my GP, whom my son had met exactly twice. "They mentioned that for someone your age, living alone without a support system nearby." "I have a support system," I said. There was a pause. "Mom, I just want what's best for you." "I know you do," I said, and I kept my voice completely even because I am a retired school administrator and I have spent 30 years managing difficult conversations with people who thought they knew better than me. "Let's talk more soon, okay? I have to go. I'm making dinner." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, and then I finished making dinner and I ate it at my own table in my own house, and I didn't feel guilty at all. That surprised me. What came next surprised my son considerably more. 2 weeks later, I accepted a private offer on my house, $387,000, clean, no realtor commission, to a couple who'd been looking in the neighborhood for months and jumped when the listing went up quietly through an agent friend of Sandra's. I signed the papers on a Wednesday afternoon. The closing was scheduled for 5 weeks out. I had already arranged temporary housing through an expat relocation service, a furnished apartment in a small city in Portugal, on a 6-month lease, which gave me time to decide whether I wanted to stay. Portugal has what's called a D7 passive income visa. It's designed exactly for people like me, retirees with a pension or investment income who want to live abroad without working. The income threshold is low enough that my Social Security and my Gerald's small pension together more than qualified. I hadn't told my son any of this. He found out in stages. First, his wife called me, which told me he'd sent her ahead to test the temperature. She was warm, she was concerned. She mentioned that they'd noticed I'd seemed a little withdrawn lately and was everything okay. I said everything was wonderful and asked how my granddaughter was doing. Then my son called again, and this time his voice had lost some of its careful calibration. Apparently Sandra's office had sent a formal notice revoking his financial power of attorney. He'd received it in the mail that morning. "What is this?" he said. "It's exactly what it says it is," I told him. "Mom, why would you— did someone talk you into this? Is someone taking advantage of you? Because if someone is, no one is taking advantage of you. Because if someone is, no one is taking advantage of me," I said. "I'm taking care of myself." "But why would you remove me? I'm your son." "Yes," I said, "you are." The silence on the line stretched out for a long time. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening." "I know you don't," I said. And then I told him I loved him because I did. I do. Love is not a switch you can just turn off. But love and trust are two different things, and I had confused them for too long. I said goodbye and hung up. He showed up at my door 2 days later. He looked like he hadn't slept well. He was wearing the blue fleece he'd had since college, the one that had always made him look younger than he was, and standing on my porch he looked younger again, but not in a good way, in the way of someone who has been caught. I let him in because he is my son. He started with concern. He was worried about me, he said. He thought I might be confused about some things, that the changes I was making weren't like me. He said he'd called Dr. Fielding's office, a thing I found out later was not true. He had not, and that they shared his concerns. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd done his homework help, where I'd cut his birthday cakes, where I'd listened to every difficult thing he'd ever brought to me over a lifetime. I looked at him for a moment, and then I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the email, the one from his laptop. The one about Meadowbrook and the Birchwood house and wiping out the visa and the HELOC. He looked at it. He looked up at me. I didn't say anything. He opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. Mom, we were just talking through options. It wasn't. It's fine, I said. I made my own arrangements. I wasn't angry or I wasn't performing anger. What I felt was something more like sorrow, the kind that comes when something you've been refusing to know becomes something you can't unknow. I had known on some level for a long time that my son had begun to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. The email just made it impossible to pretend otherwise. He tried for another 20 minutes. He said he was sorry. He said he'd made a terrible mistake putting those thoughts into writing, that it was just venting, that he would never have actually gone through with it. He said his wife was sorry too. He said they'd been under a lot of financial pressure, which I knew was true, and I felt for him in the way you always feel for your children, even when they've done something that breaks your heart. But I had already signed the papers. The house was sold. The apartment in Portugal was waiting. Wanda had the power of attorney. I'm moving, I told him. What? I'm moving to Portugal. The closing on the house is in 3 weeks. I've already arranged everything. He stared at me. Mom, you can't. You're 68 years old. You can't just. I did the crossword this morning, I said. In pen. Would you like to see it? He didn't think that was funny. I thought it was a little funny. He left after another half hour of trying to talk me out of something that was already done. I stood on the porch and watched him drive away, and I felt the same feeling I'd had in Sandra's office, that sensation of standing on an edge. But this time I wasn't afraid of it. I was just ready. I arrived in Porto on a grey October morning. The kind of morning where the light is soft and the streets are still damp from overnight rain and everything smells faintly of the sea. A woman from the relocation service met me at the airport with a sign and drove me to the apartment, which was on the 3rd floor of a building near the riverfront, with high ceilings and a balcony overlooking a narrow street where cats slept on windowsills. I sat on that balcony for a long time that first afternoon. I had a cup of coffee, proper espresso from the cafe downstairs, nothing like the watered-down drip I'd made at home for 30 years, and I watched the street below and tried to locate the feeling I was expecting to have. Grief, maybe. Homesickness. Guilt. What I felt instead was something quieter and more unfamiliar. I felt like myself. Not the version of myself that existed in relation to my son, or to Gerald's memory, or to 34 years of a life built around being useful to other people. Just myself. 68 years old, bad knee and all, sitting on a balcony in Portugal with a cup of excellent coffee, with no one needing anything from me. The calls started within 48 hours of my departure. My son, his wife, a few numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail and listened to the messages once, just once, to make sure there was no real emergency involving my granddaughter. There wasn't. My son's first messages were still in problem-solving mode. Mom, call me back. We need to talk through this. This is not the right decision. His wife was softer, more personal. Then, by the 4th day, there was a message from a social worker at the county's Adult Protective Services office. My son had reported that he believed his mother was making erratic financial decisions and may be experiencing cognitive decline. I almost laughed. I called Sandra from the balcony, watching a cat pick its way along a wrought iron railing across the street. He filed an APS report, I told her. I know, she said. They called me. I explained the situation. He's claiming cognitive decline. I know. I have documentation of every conversation we've had, including your instruction to revoke the POA and the explicit reasoning you gave for doing so. I also have the signed letters from Dr. Fielding, your actual doctor who I contacted directly, confirming that you have no documented cognitive concerns and that you have been in excellent mental health at your last 3 physicals. I asked her if there was anything I needed to do. Talk to the APS worker when they call, she said. Be exactly as sharp and clear as you are right now. This isn't going to go anywhere. The APS worker called 2 days later, a kind, tired-sounding woman named Miss Torres, who asked me careful questions for about 40 minutes. What year was it? Who was the president? Did I understand the legal changes I had made? Could I explain my reasons for moving abroad? I answered everything clearly and precisely, and at the end she said, Mrs. Nora, everything you've told me is consistent, coherent, and frankly very well organized. I'm going to document this conversation and close the case. Will my son be notified that the report was found to be unsubstantiated? I asked. Yes, she said. That is part of the process. Good, I thought. Let him sit with that. I joined a walking group for expats in my 3rd week. There were about a dozen of us, ages ranging from a spry 62 to a woman named Harriet who was 81 and walked faster than anyone else. We walked along the river on Tuesday mornings and through the old town on Saturdays. I started picking up Portuguese from the cafe downstairs and from a language app I use for an hour every evening. My knee, with the walking and the cobblestones, actually began to hurt less. Something about the movement, maybe, or the slightly warmer climate. In November, I got a letter, a real letter, paper, envelope, stamp, from my granddaughter. She was 9 and had printed it very carefully in purple marker. Dear Grammy Nora, Dad said you moved far away. Are you coming back? I miss you. My dance recital is December 14. I hope you can see it. I drew you a picture of a castle because Portugal has castles. Love, Lily. The drawing was of a very round castle with flags on top, and a small figure with white hair in front of it, which I understood to be me. I kept the letter on the kitchen counter for 2 weeks before I moved it to the windowsill. My son sent one final message in November, and this one was different from the others. No problem solving, no negotiating. It was short. Mom, I want you to know I understand now why you left. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to stay in contact so I know you're okay. I know I don't deserve that, but I'm asking anyway. I thought about that message for several days. Then I called him. Not because he deserved it, because he is my son and I am his mother, and those 2 things are still true even after everything. I told him I was well. I told him I was not coming home. I told him that if he wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be built differently from what we'd had before, and that was going to take a long time and would depend entirely on what he did next, not what he said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." It was not a resolution. It was not forgiveness, though I think forgiveness might arrive eventually, slowly the way it does when you stop waiting for it. It was just a door left slightly open instead of locked. By December, I had sold my furniture back home. Wanda handled it, and she was efficient and thorough as always, and used the proceeds to furnish the Porto apartment properly. A small desk by the window, a reading chair with a good lamp, a kitchen that I'd stocked with things I actually liked. I started cooking again in a real way, not just reheating, and discovered that Portuguese olive oil is extraordinary, and that bacalhau, the salt cod, takes about 48 different preparations, and I intended to learn most of them. The settlement from the house sale cleared in December. After the attorney fees and moving costs and the first 6 months of rent, I had $298,000 in my account, plus my Social Security and the small pension. I met with a Portuguese registered financial advisor who specialized in expat clients, and we put together a plan. Not complicated, just sensible, a mix of low-risk investments and a modest reserve structured around my actual expenses rather than anyone else's emergencies. For the first time in a decade, no one was asking me for money. I want to tell you what that feels like, because I don't think I understood it until it was true. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like being able to take a deep breath all the way down to the bottom of your lungs, the kind of breath you didn't know you'd been holding. In January, I started a small blog, not for any particular reason, just because I'd always liked to write and had never made time for it. I wrote about Porto, about the light in winter, about learning a language at 68, about what it felt like to start over. I wrote one post about my son, anonymously and carefully about the email and what came after. I didn't name him. I didn't describe the city. I just described the feeling of finding out that someone you trusted completely had made plans for your life without asking you. The response was more than I expected. Hundreds of women and some men wrote to me in the comments. I thought I was the only one. My daughter did something similar. I've been afraid to do what you did. Your story gave me the courage to call an attorney. I was not a unique case. I was, in some ways, a very ordinary case, just one of thousands of older people who had spent their lives giving to their children and had woken up one day to discover they'd been filed away under the category of liability. By spring, I had genuinely good friends. Harriet from the walking group, who had come to Portugal after her second husband died and had no intention of ever leaving. A retired teacher named Cecilia from Vancouver who was hilarious and made her own wine. A quiet, kind man named Augusto who ran the cafe downstairs and always remembered that I liked my espresso with just a little hot water on the side. On a Saturday in April, I was sitting on my balcony reading a real book, paper, not a screen, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Grammy. Nora. It's Lily. I found your blog. I'm not supposed to be on here, but I wanted to say hi. Your pictures of Portugal are really pretty. I hope I can visit someday. Dad doesn't know I'm messaging you. Please don't tell him yet. Love, Lily." I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I wrote back, "Hi, my Lily. This is the best message I've gotten in a very long time. I would love a visit more than anything. Your castle drawing is on my windowsill. I love you." I sat there with the phone in my lap, looking out at the rooftops and the river beyond them, and I thought about the morning I'd found the email, about Sandra's office and the beaded reading glasses chain, about packing 2 suitcases and leaving behind 34 years of a life that had been built almost entirely around other people's needs. I don't regret the $340,000. I want to say that clearly. I gave that money because I love my son, and that was true then and it's still true. What I regret is confusing love with self-erasure for so long. The money was always replaceable. Time is not. The years I spent making myself small so he would never feel lacking, those I'll never get back. But this is what I know now. Sitting on this balcony at 68 years old with a cup of coffee and a book and a message from my granddaughter on my phone and the sound of the city waking up below me, it is never too late to take up space. It is never too late to look at your own life and decide you'd like to actually live it, not just manage it from a distance while everyone else makes use of you. My son did me a terrible thing. He also, without meaning to, showed me a door I'd been standing in front of for years without seeing it. I walked through. I'm still walking. If you're watching this and you see yourself in any part of my story, the giving that never seems to be enough, the calls that only come when something is needed, the way you've learned to make yourself smaller and smaller until you're not sure you take up any space at all, I want you to know that the door is there. It's been there the whole time. You just have to decide to walk through it. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. And click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because the story in it is one you are absolutely not going to see coming. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since I moved to Porto. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain, practical kind. The kind where you trace a line backward from where you are and see clearly how every small decision, every choice to stay quiet or speak up or let something slide, brought you exactly here. My son didn't become someone who could write that email overnight. And I didn't become someone who could miss it for so long overnight either. We built that dynamic together, slowly, over years, me giving without limits, him learning that the limits didn't exist. I taught him, without meaning to, that I was a resource rather than a person. Every time I wrote a check without being asked. Every time I said yes when I should have said, "Let me think about it." Every time I absorbed his financial emergencies as if they were my own emergencies, as if the boundary between his life and mine didn't exist. That's not his fault alone. That's mine too. And I think that's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not the anger at what he did, but the honest recognition of what I'd allowed to grow between us for so long. What he did with that email was wrong. Full stop. Planning to use a false narrative of cognitive decline to place your mother in a memory care facility so you can liquidate her home, that is a betrayal of a kind that I still don't have clean words for. But the conditions that made him think he could do it, that I would go along with it, that I'd feel too guilty to resist, those conditions were ones we'd both spent years constructing. Tracing that line backward didn't make me feel sorry for him. It made me feel something more useful. Clear. And clarity, I've learned, is what real courage runs on. Not anger, not pride, just the ability to see a situation exactly as it is and decide what you're going to do about it. I called Sandra, I called Wanda, I made appointments and signed papers and booked a flight. None of that felt brave in the moment. It felt like putting one foot in front of the other in the dark. Bravery, I think, is mostly just that. Continuing to move when you can't see where the floor is. What I want anyone to take from Nora's story, from my story, is this. The people who love you will not always protect you. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of taking advantage of the trust you built with them, precisely because they know exactly how much you'll tolerate before you push back. That is not a reason to stop loving people. It is a reason to know your own limits, to document your own life, to have at least one Sandra and one Wanda in your corner, someone whose loyalty is to you and not to the version of you that everyone else finds convenient. Intelligence isn't only what you know. It's knowing when the story you've been telling yourself about someone no longer matches the evidence in front of you. I was a smart woman who had built a career on sharp thinking, and I still almost missed it. Not because I was naive, because I wanted to believe something different was true. Wanting something to be true is not the same as it being true. That gap is where people get hurt. And about endurance, leaving wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the morning after I arrived in Porto, when the apartment was quiet and unfamiliar, and I didn't know the word for the kind of coffee I wanted, or which direction the river was, and I sat on that balcony wondering if I'd made an enormous mistake. Endurance isn't the dramatic moment of decision. It's the next morning, and the morning after that, when you keep going anyway. Lily's letter is still on my windowsill. That's the part of the story I think about most. My granddaughter found her way to me on her own by her own choice, with purple marker and a drawing of a castle. Some things, it turns out, hold even when everything around them breaks. You just have to give them enough time and enough space to find their way through.